Welcome to the Lunch and Learn program of the Red River Valley Asperger Autism Network. We are a nonprofit organization whose mission is to empower, support, educate, and advocate for persons on the autism spectrum and their families. The format for today is a brief presentation of the topic, followed by question and answers. We are privileged to have two people on our panel today to help answer questions and give you any more information that you might like to know about social thinking. Two of our panelists were unable at the last moment to come. You know how life gets in the way sometimes. So we're happy to have these two people with us, and I'm going to let you introduce yourselves.
I'm Jill Todd. I'm a speech-language pathologist with the Moorhead Public Schools. I've been doing that about 10 years now. The last 3 years, I've also been doing some autism consulting with the secondary grades there.
My name is John Cody. I am on the autistic spectrum disorder. I have Asperger's, so I'm able to give you that perspective. I am also the video editor for our organization, and I also am on the Speakers Bureau. I have spoken both here and at other events about my life and life through my own perspective with autism, and I'm able to give you my own insights on certain areas today.
Thank you. We're really grateful that both of you are able to help us today. Our topic today is social thinking. And you may want to follow along with the PowerPoint handout, but in particular, there are two other handouts that were given to you that we will definitely refer to during this, so you might want to have those handy for you. Social thinking is really a pretty complicated process that involves, I think about you, and how I think about you, or what I think about you, might affect how I behave toward you, then which affects how you might respond to me, and then that affects how I feel about myself. And it's a very synergistic, complex interaction of a number of things. We've got the mind involved, the body involved, your physical presence, how close you are, what you look like to that person, and then you're visually processing nonverbal cues, and you have to use language and interpret language from other people. So it's a very complex process. So we need to break this down for our young people and adults on the spectrum who have difficulty in this area. We want to teach them skills about how our minds work, why we react and respond the way we do, how our behaviors might affect, what I do might affect how you perceive me, and then how you respond to me as a result. If I come out angry and stressed, you're going to have a different response to me than if I'm calm and approach you in a friendly manner. And then how all of this affects our emotions and responses to relationships with other people. So we have to help, or we want to help our young people develop the abilities to recognize that we all have different abilities in how we process social information. Some of us are more comfortable than others all of the time. This isn't just unique to folks on the spectrum, but they tend to have a greater difficulty with it. The ability to figure out social interactions and communication so things go better. Most of the folks I talk to wish that it went better when things don't go well. And then how they can learn to respond better in a particular social setting. This is the handout I was referring to, the tree. Michelle Garcia Winner, who is a speech and language pathologist, sees the current teaching about social skills as dealing more with the details, not the basic skills required to be a better social thinker, to be able to generalize to other situations. Like we teach, when somebody says this, you should say this. Well, that might work in that situation, but it may not work in all situations. So she sees social thinking skills as building on some basic skills, like you would see a tree developing. On your handout, you'll see that the tree, we begin with the root system. Social skills are rooted in our neurological capacity to grow and mature. And we all know that autism is a neurological difference. So that may not happen at the same, this maturity may not happen at the same rate and in the same form that it would happen for neurotypical people. So that's why we need to pay attention to what some of these basic skills are, or needs are. People with autism need more direct teaching of these things. For example, joint attention, which means paying attention to the same thing at the same time. When I'm talking to you, I don't necessarily want you off wandering, doing something different. Executive functioning skills, which are being organized and planning ahead. Central coherence, which is kind of paying attention at the same time. Theory of mind is something we've talked about also as being able to take someone else's perspective. And then emotional recognition and reciprocity. If someone comes at you in a kind, friendly manner, you want to be sure to address that in the same, respond in the same way. Next, we look at the skills and concepts that are within the trunk of the tree. These depend on the effective growth of the root system. So, Winner sees this as she uses I laugh as kind of a mnemonic device to remember what all goes into here. So it's like being able to initiate conversation, being able to listen with your eyes and your brain, making abstractions and inferences, understanding perspective of the other person, Gestalt processing, which means see the whole picture of what's going on around you, and then using humor and relating to another person. These are things that are important in the process of learning specific skills later on. On the tree, the branches represent concepts and skills that emerge from having this solid root system and the strong trunk. These are core concepts that emerge from these two places, such as reading comprehension, for example. That depends a lot on social understanding. Written expression, conversational skills, working in a group, playing with peers, all of these things require those basic concepts being developed. When we get to the leaves, that's where individual strategies and skills come into play. And I like this as an example, for peer play, for example. And this goes at all ages. I mean, I see this in Game On with teenagers and young adults. You need to learn how to cooperate. What is that? How do I do that? Turn taking. Even in their teens, our guys get involved with Minecraft, and they forget that there's some turn taking involved in there, and we have to help them sometimes with that. Now, because this is a highly motivational activity and they love it and want to stay involved, they will take coaching from whoever is there, me usually supporting this group. And it's a natural way to learn this because the consequences are right there. If I'm rude to him or if I troll, which is our big thing right now, and they don't really want it, it has some negative consequences. So how can I work on that in a way that's more productive so we can all have fun? Being friendly, how do you do that? How do you deal with changes in the rules? These are skills that are specific skills that can be taught, but they are dependent on having those lower parts of the tree well established. One way that Michelle Garcia Winner helps us figure out how to do this is to look at the 4 steps of communication that is on your other handout. The 4 steps involve thinking about others and what they're thinking about us. And they start this with really little kids with, what am I looking at? What am I looking at? And then the child has to look at the same thing. For some kids, that's harder than others. And then, what do you think I'm thinking about that? Well, you're looking at that light and you're probably thinking, that's really too bright. Although that might not be what the child says at first. It's like, it's white. It's in the ceiling, you know. And so you start helping them. There are ways to help kids learn to think about others. And then you move to, what are you thinking about me? And that's just kind of a really basic way to get started in social thinking. One of the next thing is you have to learn how to establish a physical presence. For example, if you want to enter a group, that's one of the first things we tell kids. If you want to enter the group to play, you need to go near them. You need to let them know you want to be there. So you approach in a way that doesn't seem off-putting, and you turn your, I like this, the way she says this, you turn your shoulders in a way that shows you want to come in. She's not talking about eye contact, but the rest of your body is showing you want to become part of this, because a lot of our kids have trouble with eye contact. My grandson has learned to look in my direction, is what I say. Don't look at my eyes, look in my direction, so I know you're paying attention to me. Then there's thinking with our eyes is a way of getting to looking at cues that other people are giving you. And it's a term that children and young adults get about interpreting what's going on around them socially. And then we also have to use language to relate to other people. One strategy that we could use at home to help kids is called behavior mapping. And this is, as we go into this, you may recognize that this is really similar to Carol Gray's social stories, to comic strip conversations, which are ways to help kids learn what's expected. And in social behavior mapping, we do talk about what the expected behaviors are and the unexpected behaviors are. For example, you're expected to listen when someone else is talking. Ask a question about what they're saying. My grandson ran into this recently. He's 15, and he has a job, and he loves it, and it's a natural social environment for him. But after work, a friend came up to him and started talking about what he was eating. And I haven't ever had that before, and what do you think about that? Does that taste good? And he barely responded to her. And he wasn't being rude, he just didn't see this as an opportunity to start a conversation. So in the car on the way home, I said, did you realize she was trying to engage you in a conversation? And he said, no. And I said, well, when she says, I should have asked it in social thinking terms, but I didn't. At the time, I didn't think about it. But, so I suggested to him that she was wanting to know more about him, and how could he let her know that he was paying attention. And so I said, well, I could answer her, and then I could ask her a question. So just coincidentally, he had social thinking class the next day, and I had emailed his teacher saying, I found this really interesting. So right away, she wrapped it into the lesson, and each child, which they were doing about conversations anyway, and she required each kid then to ask a question of the person who started a conversation, or tried to converse with them. And he looks at her and he says, this is really hard for me. And he came up with a question, though. So he was following, he was doing what she asked, and then what she noticed was that he asked the same question each time. But like she said, that's fine. He's starting. He's got the idea. He knows ask a question. This question will almost always work. But given more experience, she's really felt confident he would expand that. So I thought that was really cool. And it also highlights how when we keep in touch with our teachers, you know, this is a team, and it really works. The problem for a lot of our kids is they don't always see the whole situation, and so they might need they do need extra help, information about the context and generalizing. We can't assume that we know that that she knows her response is related to the consequences that come after it. We have to help her see that. We don't know, he doesn't know how his responses affect the perspective of the person he's talking to or he's around. We have to help him see that. There are a lot of other strategies that you can find in the resource page on your handout. It's on the back page of the, or it's on the second handout, sorry. The winner's website is full of resources. And her blog is really good. Also, you get a lot of your questions answered there, not have to buy anything. Her books are reasonably priced. Her articles, there's articles on there as well. It's really a wealth of information. The other piece about behavior mapping is that we talk about unexpected behaviors. I really like this way of saying, don't do that. But as we talk about, this is an unexpected behavior. When you're conversing with somebody, they don't expect you to interrupt them all the time. They don't expect you to not listen and be doing something different. Although you have to remember that a lot of our kids can do two things at once. I can have good conversations with my grandson while he's playing with his Nintendo, but I have to make sure. I always say, are you tuning in to me? Because last night we were doing fine, and all of a sudden he says, I have to tell you that later. He was really engrossed in his game. But we've kind of understood that. We have a way of working through that now. Walking away while they're speaking is unexpected. What does that mean? And so you would have to walk through and talk to them about that. And then responding by changing the subject to your topic of choice may not always work. You know, that can be unexpected. There are some, as I mentioned, the resources then on the handouts. Does anybody have any, that's kind of what I wanted to tell you today, and I realize this is a very short, brief introduction with maybe just a few things that you could maybe take to use at home. But I really encourage you to look at Michelle Garcia-Winter's website if there's something that you'd like to know more about. And then we have some experts up here too who could answer any more questions you might have. So does anybody have a question that you'd like to talk about?
I think, Jill, you want to talk about the programming that you're doing?
Yeah, Jill, if you would talk about, repeat the question so we can hear it. The programming you're involved with?
Yeah, I'm mainly at the middle school and high school overseeing programs there. I would say about 2 to 3 years now we've switched some programming in our buildings a little bit, seeing that we really had a need. Students needing these social thinking skills and just didn't feel like we had a great place to teach them these skills and let them practice. So we have a resource room that's dedicated now to teaching these skills. So students, instead of going to what would be working on other study skills like academic, reading, math, these students will go and they'll do some of these social thinking exercises. They also work on executive functioning, things like organizing, life skills like that. It's been a trial, you know, kind of learning as we go and what works, what isn't, and trying to really align our middle school to our high school so we're really teaching age-appropriate skills. And I agree with you. You mentioned earlier, you know, even with adults teaching them the social skills, we always say at every age we feel like you have to almost reteach the same skills because it's just different expectations at different age levels. So while they're in kindergarten and yes, they can do their things with their peers, it just really changes as they grow. So there's always things to be addressing and working on. And I'm sure you, as growing up with that, I'm sure you also seen that, how things change.
Yep.
Oh, I think that's interesting. You said you're kind of getting started with this. I know the Fargo Public Schools are working on this as well. And it is kind of a new attempt. Are you seeing it that students seem to be able to generalize a little bit better when they have the thinking part of it rather than the specific skill development?
I think that's the part that we need to kind of help facilitate more. Because we're finding, yeah, they can do it really well in our setting where it's very supported. But that's kind of where we are always trying to brainstorm ideas as far as how can we help them generalize. And a lot of that is educating our general ed teachers and having the same expectations in the general classroom as we are in our resource rooms.
And I think another piece is making sure that the families are aware of those strategies and skills because then we can work with them the rest of the time, you know, outside of school.
If I am at a meeting and I think of a certain everybody should use this wording with a student too. I might try to provide that to the team and would do that same thing with the teachers.
And what school district is that in?
Moorhead Public Schools.
And I know West Fargo and Fargo are also doing some too. We actually in West Fargo, we have a class at the high school, the social skills class, and this is the typical, the students that attend there, and they get credit for it. So it's an elective credit. And we're adding a second one this year. The first one is basic social skills for, everyday living and learning. And then the second semester will actually be geared towards those kids and work skills and going out after graduation, what they'll need.
Do you think that expected, unexpected behavior piece helps them? Like,
Yeah,
I was
maybe.
thinking like in the work environment.
Yeah. And this will be the first year they're doing that second class, the second semester of the class. So I think it will be kind of a learning thing for them as well. But that is the language that they're using as expected and unexpected behavior. So.
All right.
All right. In elementary too, because I was just in the classroom and I saw unexpected,
Yeah.
expected behaviors up on the wall. So are you?
Well, I'm only at the high school.
I know, but
I'm not sure.
are they doing the?
They are.
Some of the
We have an autism specialist, a district autism specialist, and she's trying to make it as uniform as possible through all the schools, and we're getting pretty close to where at least somebody in every school is using that language.
Because I know your high school has some great programs too.
Yep, we use the same type of curriculum, and I mean, we use it even in elementary. It's just depending on what, like the Superflex is great for an elementary age, so we wouldn't necessarily be using that at the high school, but there's a curriculum we use at the high school that I just started working on with the kindergartner today. Just teaching it in a different way, but it's never too early to start that's common language and those skills. So.
Would you tell a little bit about the Superflex? Because I think that's a really cool thing that parents could probably use as well.
Yeah, I haven't used it a lot because I've mainly been in the secondary, but I do know it has superhero type thing, which a lot of kids love at that elementary age. I know like there's Rockman is it called? And he's the guy that if you aren't being flexible with your thinking, you might be rock brain. So it's got superheroes that tie to these skills that you're trying to teach students. So it's just a fun way to learn those skills, and it can be an easy little reminder. I think they've made a ton of superheroes. I'm not even really sure how many they even have anymore, but you can even kind of create your own. If you have a certain issue at home and maybe you have a picky eater, you could always think of your own little superhero thing, and that could be your little trick.
It's on the website, Winner's website, and it's called Superflex, the Team of Unthinkables and the 5-Step Power Plan. And it's the kind of thing that grabs kids' attention, even into middle school, I think, would like the concepts of it. You'd have to probably use more of their kind of language, but they have, their helpers are people like the decider, who helps you stop, decide, and describe what's going on. And then there's the social detective, that's the ability to stop and observe the people in the situation. And then there's the breakthrough, who helps you to stop and think. These are all skills that are needed before you can respond. And it's just really kind of a neat way to get the ideas to the children in a way that they're going to listen to through the story concepts. And then I like Flex Do-Body, who uses flexible thinking. That's one thing I've been working on with my grandson lately. When I see him doing something like it's an unexpected behavior in a difficult situation, which is actually an expected behavior, but it's unexpected for him often because he's flexible. So we acknowledge the flexibility. And that's another key, is not going overboard with that, and we do a high five or I appreciate you were being flexible about that. And he goes, and then we go on. Because he doesn't want you're talking too much stuff. We've also heard that too. We'll get that from him, won't we, if you're going overboard? But that's kind of an interesting one to look at. It's a curriculum, but I think there's a lot of things that we could build on at home as well. based on that curriculum.
Another one of my favorites is the zones curriculum. You guys are using that in the zones. Yeah.
The zones of regulation?
Yep. Just a really visual way to teach kids how you're in control of your body and your emotions, and it has a lot of that same language, what's unexpected, what's expected for these feelings and these zones, and that was the one I used at the elementary. We were using it all the way up through the high school, so that's a really standard one that we like and really good skills.
That's pretty, I know we've talked before about the 5-point scale, so it's kind of similar to that,
It is,
right?
yep.
If you're familiar with the 5-point scale.
I'm sorry, what was that called?
The zones.
The zones of
Zones
regulation.
of regulation. And like you said, her materials are very reasonably priced. So that would be something that.
Sign your child up for the voucher. That's the kind of thing, the North Dakota voucher, that's the kind of thing that you could purchase or have purchased under voucher funds, so it wouldn't have to be out of pocket. If you're interested in the North Dakota Autism Voucher, just contact tricia.page@nd.gov, and she can give you the information you might need about that. John, when you were growing up, could you tell us a little bit about some of the social bumps you ran into, and maybe how you learned to get past them?
Yeah. Well, first of all, where were all these programs when I was growing up?
Nobody knew about it as burgers yet.
A lot of times it was just trial and error a lot of times for me. I wasn't always grasping what this is, and that goes back to the fact that a lot of people with Asperger's are not born with these intuitive social thinking, whereas neurotypicals are, but they are learned over time, and they can be learned over time. And it just takes trial and error at times. I would sometimes say things that I didn't think would be interpreted a certain way, and that would create just problems between two parties in not understanding each other. That was a bump in the road. Understanding sarcasm and responding appropriately to that. But these are all things that through learning different traits and different signs of the different things, I would actively analyze the situation at the time, and then I would make a calculated guess of how to respond. And then over time, that becomes a very natural thing to do. So now I'm doing it without even really thinking about the analyzing part of it. It's become more second nature to me over time. So that does show that while you're doing some of these things here, like the superflex, that's not always going to be the case. Eventually, they're going to be able to do this very naturally with skipping that step eventually. So it can become a very natural thing. And some of the things I had difficulty with, like I said before, sarcasm, understanding how something will be interpreted. Sometimes something can be picked up as being rude, even though that was not my intention at all. Body language was sometimes always a big, difficult thing for me. Some of the executive function skills at the time, trying to think on my feet in a situation. If something happens that is unexpected, that's always a little surprising, and trying to adjust appropriately to the situation itself. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and two things it makes me think of. One is that you had to make a much more concerted effort to do that than your peers.
Yes.
So it was really hard work.
Yes.
And the second thing is, it's just so hopeful for us to see that it may take longer than with typically developing kiddos, neurotypically developing kiddos, but that it can be done.
It can be done, yeah.
With ongoing coaching and support
Yep.
and reminding.
A lot of times it was, there was some coaching, but it was also a lot of stuff on my part too. as I say in my other speech that I give to other groups with the sarcasm bit, I had to actively analyze several different factors on the spot. I looked for a particular placement of the head, I look at the tone of voice, I look at the context of the presentation, and a couple of other ones. And I am analyzing this stuff, creating a bit of a pause so I can analyze each individual factor and then determine with an educated guess if that is sarcasm or not. Now, I skip over that part and I'm able to understand like that. So it took longer to get to that point, but I got to that point, and now it's very second nature to me to understand the social situations. So, yeah.
Yes.
Do you think that you understand it more as, that's as an adult? You know what, because I think when you have younger kids and they're not like, my kid goes to West Fargo High, and I'm not in a social skills class, and I just texted as this was going on or emailed, and it can't fit in his schedule right now. Well, it should, and the reason he's struggling in his classes is because he's missing this. So I guess what I'm wondering is, I worry about all this social stuff. Did you learn it when you were older and out of school, or was it stuff that you were working on and processing when you were?
I started really processing this stuff, understanding that there were differences, understanding that there were things I needed to really learn. Late middle school, early high school, and then really able to start naturally responding to everything and making a very natural process my first couple years of college. But so yeah, early elementary school, that was a struggle for this particular area, but still in school, high school age, where I was able to start with the process of understanding this stuff. And this was before you have all these programs you have now, which you're able to teach at a lot younger age. So I think it's going to make it even an easier transition for current students.
Well, and I think too, as you get used to it, like my son, who's on the spectrum, gets humor more now, because we always joke at home, and he would just look at us like, is that supposed to be, but now we actually hear him doing sarcasm, which he never did before. So I think he's starting to get that more at home, just because he's around it. So the response, as you're saying, is quicker.
Yep, it's quicker, and the more you're exposed to it, and then it's put in the proper context, you're able to understand it. And if he's doing sarcasm, that's a good sign of saying that he understands it. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, and I think that's an age at which sarcasm is more well understood by kids. Sarcasm is a hard thing. I remember when my daughter was in high school, my oldest daughter, she graduated in '94, which was when we first heard about Asperger's. And she, my husband was on the school board, and there was this one particular English teacher who was really excellent with the juniors and the seniors, because she had kind of a sarcastic, kind of a dry sense of humor. And the younger kids, the sophomores, freshmen and sophomores, didn't get it. They just did. They thought she was mean. They didn't understand her, and she was really excellent. It was just that particular style didn't work for them. But the older kids were more into it. Now, I'm not so keen on sarcasm anyway, because it can be a hurtful thing if you're not careful how you use it. But I think I would agree with you. I mean, that was the first thing I thought of, was that if you start getting sarcasm in junior high, middle school, that's kind of right. Would you think, Barb, that's kind of where they start really getting it?
It can go really wrong really fast.
Really fast.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so it's really, and part of what I like about social thinking is you're learning context.
Right.
You're not just learning, reading one or two things, but you're learning, and I love how you describe that, John, about all the steps that you go through. And you're probably still doing that, but it's so fast now.
Yeah.
It's become so much more routine for you, but that's still the way that you're probably processing.
Just a lot faster, yeah.
Yeah.
On the other side of that, though, I'm wondering though if, because I see this sometimes with my grandson, is that after having a number of social interactions for a while, he's just like done. I think he's worn out. And I've spotted this in a summer program at College for Kids at MSUM. He loved the robotics class, which went till 3. It was an all-day thing, they had breaks, it was great, the teachers were outstanding, he got lots of support. 2 o'clock came around, he was finished. He was done, his energy was just
May
gone.
I add to that?
Uh-huh.
Putting things in context and doing social functioning, which automatically is a little more difficult for us, especially at early ages, it is exhausting, especially when I was in elementary school. It is very exhausting to be doing everything, because there's a lot of stuff, like I said before, happening behind the scenes in my brain that you're not really seeing. And so that's taking, you're trying to sprint to a finish line where another person would just walk. And what that means now is that I'm getting worn out faster. So yeah, I can definitely see where he would be just done. And you can just reach a certain level where you just have no more energy at that point in time, and your resources are lower, so then you just don't want to do any more social interaction until you kind of recharge your batteries. So yeah, we're doing a sprint where another person would be doing a walk. We're still doing the work of the social interactions, but it can make us a little bit more worn out. So if you're seeing your child, you know, kind of exhausted at 2 o'clock, it's not that they are becoming more reserved because they don't want to interact. It's just that they've kind of burned themselves out at this point, so it's a little harder to interact. That makes sense?
Anything you can think of that you'd like to add that maybe was glossed over kind of quickly in this short presentation, or you think would be helpful?
Does anybody have any other questions?
I have a daughter and she's 6 and she does not understand when other people are engaging her or when they aren't interested in talking. What would be some ways to help her understand when it's just her and the kids?
She's not understanding when the people are mean to her?
No, she doesn't understand at all.
Well, on one hand, that's a good thing, because then, you know, you're not getting hurt. Feelings aren't getting hurt, you can understand when someone's being mean to you. But like I do, there are just different steps, looking at things objectively and kind of looking at different signs. Looking at, so you just try to work it through her step by step of what this means, what that means, and I think that could be learned, and then just work with her to not feel rejected if somebody just doesn't want to talk. Just okay, just back off, and you can try and talk to somebody else. It's nothing personal type thing.
Are there times when she doesn't want to talk to you, when she just wants to?
No, she's very, very social.
Because I was just thinking that if there was a time that you could relate that to something that she's experienced, where, no, I don't want to talk about that right now, Mom, I want to do this. That might be an example you could use to say, well, maybe that was what she was doing too, but she was doing something else and didn't want to talk to you.
But I think because I've had kids where they become the target.
Yes.
They're for the group. And so they get brought, you know, it's like we're going to befriend this vulnerable child, but for the purposes of actively being mean. Is that some of what's happening, or are they just, what are they doing?
As far as I've understood, it's just when I've never actually heard when it's from my husband, and it's just making comments and then walk away, and she doesn't, for her worst situation is being alone. So she just wants somebody to talk to,
Any friend at all, and that's when they, unfortunately, kids get really vulnerable to being befriended by kids without very good intentions of being friends. Because they don't know the difference. I mean, it's like somebody's talking to me, someone wants to play with me, and that's really a tough situation. I think sometimes tough in schools to always see what's going on too, because they're not always delivering the negative comments, because in our best schools and oh, so-and-so is really social. Well, not in a good way. I mean, this isn't being really understanding those social skills.
Sometimes you could maybe get the teacher to help find one supportive child who would be willing to help her when she wants to engage. And then maybe you could help her at home. If you want to go talk to somebody, these are some things you do, like from what Winter suggests, that you go up and you stand next to them or you play next to them and then you make eye contact. There's more specifics than what I went over. You make eye contact, which for her might be really hard, but in other words, you look at the person and then you ask a question or listen to what they're saying and then say something. A lot of our kids get into trouble when they want to talk only about what they're interested in, and that's one of the really hard things, especially when they're little, like 6 years old, to see, well, somebody else might want to talk about this instead of what you want to talk about. But it would allow her to begin to see how to make positive connections.
Does anybody do a circle of friends anymore in the schools?
I wish.
I know some in Fargo did for a while, but
I haven't heard about it lately. I know when we talked about, there was something like that for my grandson in 3rd grade, which was really outstanding, really helped him a lot. And then it dwindled away, and then in middle school, we were told, well, everybody's having trouble monitoring their own behavior, much less, trying to help somebody else's behavior. And we weren't asking them to modify his behavior, but anyway, it was like they're so caught up in their own worlds that it's really hard for them to extend out. So it wasn't tried in middle school for him, but I think it's possible, I really do.
I haven't used that.
Elementary school that are using nurture heart and have sort of something like that, where they sort of go around and
yeah.
make
Because I
positive
know
comments.
where I thought it'd be really effective is when they, really included the really pro-social peers in the groups, and then that just sort of spread through the classroom. And how often they wanted to be a part of the social supports.
Well, understanding, for example, when the child is starting to get, agitated or revved up about something that's struggling, I had a friend come over and say, this looks really hard. How about, and then they'd sit down with them and work on it with them, which is, that's a social interaction, but it was geared to understanding this kiddo and including him and helping him be a part. It can be fun. I saw it done really well for a child. Actually, a parent taught me this when I was an elementary school counselor. She taught me about circle of friends, and her little girl had Down syndrome, but she didn't have the typical appearance of a child with Down syndrome, so it was not always clear to people that she had some real limitations in her thinking abilities, but she was very well liked. The kids liked her, and we developed this circle of friends before she went from 5th grade to middle school. And they would do things like call her up after school one day and just say hi. Or if they were going to, a couple of them were going to go to the mall, ask if she could come with them. It's a real social group for little girls. And then when they went to middle school, the counselor continued with it and asked them to be sure and invite her to have a place to sit for lunch. Those are some of the real hard times. And so she always had a group of people to sit with at lunch, so she felt included in those kinds of ways. And so it's really a neat thing that I think can be done fairly easily, but it's usually a school counselor, from my experience, that will get that going.
And going back to your question back there, I was also thinking, are there any extracurricular activities that your daughter would be interested in school? If you can find like interests, you'll be able to find somebody that'd be more willing to socially interact with her instead of finding people that might just try to be mean to her.
Right now, she actually, once she gets done with
any activities that she's interested in that would have like-minded students? Common interests?
Not really right now.
Okay.
She's 6, right?
Yeah.
She would be like Brownie Girl Scouts age, maybe? Because I would think in a situation like that, you'd have a lot of adult supervision and they work on that, being kind to each other.
Yeah.
That might be something to think about if it's available. Because it's not a big commitment of time and can be kind of fun for little girls.
Okay, so first off, I guess one thing I'm wondering about is to work on social skills, what are some suggestions for adults who aren't in school anymore, who don't have any kind of programs or anything like that? What are suggestions for that?
I don't know if I'm not really familiar with all the groups, but I'm sure there are support groups available, or are there other groups that you belong to?
Not specifically with this thing, but it is self-teaching, finding stuff. There's also different supports. Talking with experts like Barb's down, and different activities that you can get into, and then just learning from other people. So it can be a slow process, but even just self-exposing to outside groups, other groups, just common interest things, you can kind of pick up on certain cues and learn from there and build from there. That'd be my perspective on it.
I would agree that there's just not very much available in the community for folks who are a little shy or uncomfortable socially to start getting connected with other people.
John, do you think Toastmasters would be someplace, or do you feel like you need to have some good skills in order to do that?
No, I think that Toastmasters is a good spot to start.
Because I think that's a great opportunity for adults to
Yeah.
get those opportunities. Think about people who maybe are a little reserved in learning to speak and
Yep.
do well with it.
And I am a member of Toastmasters for the members of the audience. But yeah, I do find that very beneficial, and I do find that we learn from each other there. We can kind of work on being a bit more reserved and building social skills there through some of the smaller activities, and then building up to some of the more socially active activities as well. So there's a whole range of activities you can do in Toastmasters, and you can kind of build up from the very small roles like the timer, and build up to doing a speech or some impromptu stuff, or the evaluator. There's just a whole range, a whole spectrum of activities within that club.
Yeah, I always just thought people had to speak, and so I didn't really even think that there was other things that people, until they were ready to speak. I mean, is that an option, and you don't have to necessarily speak right away?
Right, you don't have to speak right away. You can do many different activities. There's the timer. There's a person that is watching other people's grammar. There's a person that is evaluating the speeches. They're doing a review of a speech. You can write impromptu questions for other speakers to answer, or you can answer impromptu questions. You can run the meeting if you want to, be the Toastmaster, and then all the way up to giving a speech at your own pace. There's no time limit.
Okay.
So if you want to join Toastmasters and decide to give a speech 2 years later, there's no problem with that at all.
Okay.
I would encourage that.
Okay. Well, thank you. That's a great idea. The only other question I had is just for my own curiosity. I haven't been diagnosed, but I do wonder if I'm a little bit on the spectrum. One thing I have problems with is people will tell jokes to me, and I understand they're joking, but the way I respond, they don't think I get it. And I don't know if that's related to this, or if there's anything there specific. I don't know. That was just something I was tossing up there, because it seems to be something that consistently happens to me.
That is a little consistent with me too. Sometimes people won't quite understand that I get it, even though I do. Yeah, I can see that is a part of the spectrum of that helps to answer your question.
Okay, yeah, that does, thank you.
Well, maybe like coming up with a particular, what you think would be an expected response, like a smile and a nod, maybe, or
Yeah.
might
Yeah.
just be, oh, yeah, okay, and you don't have to say anything.
Oh,
Right,
yeah.
just a
That's
nod or a chuckle or something like that, yeah.
I'm with you. It takes me sometimes a little while to go, oh, that's what they were trying to say.
Yeah.
I think that happens to a lot of people, though. I don't think it's necessarily on
And
that.
I also like to build it to what you were talking about earlier with the sarcasm as well. You were saying a couple of times where sarcasm can get a little out of hand. I got a pretty good handle on that now, and I understand, what sarcasm is. It's an irony. When it becomes mean, that's actually not sarcasm. That's called sardonic. That's something completely different. So sardonic is being intensively derisive towards somebody, while sarcasm is actually a reverse meaning, an irony.
I like that distinction, and I think that's something we could use with people who are consistently sardonic, and they're saying, oh, I'm just kidding, Say, no, that wasn't sarcasm, that was sarcasm.
So understand the
I like that.
difference between sarcasm and being sardonic. There's a big difference between the two.
And that would be the
Sorry,
purpose of the interaction.
the purpose of the interaction. Sarcasm is purposely being ironic or saying something that means something else, but it is completely innocent. Sardonic is more of the mean, derisive, personal thing.
I can give you an example of that. There's a young man who comes to Game On who's just charming. He's a lovely young guy. And I always greet the kids, the young people, every time they come in, and I say, oh, how are you today? And he says, terrible. And he gives me this big grin. And the first time he did it, I didn't see his face when he said that. And then he turned to me so I'd see it, and I said, oh, got it. The smile tells me that you're being sarcastic.
Yep.
And he's nodded, yeah. And then the next time he did exactly the same thing on purpose, I think, to see if I got it this time, and I did. But I said the same thing to him. The smile gives it away that now I know what you mean. And I think, in a way, I'm hoping that'll help him know that when he is that way,
Smile
this,
can
the
give
clue
yeah.
to the other people so they know what you mean would be helpful. That would be helpful for me to remember, too.
Yeah.
Well, since I'm not good at getting jokes, I'm not real good at sarcasm either, so. We have about 3 minutes left. Does anybody have another question you'd like to ask? I think the thing that's important about social thinking is that it's something that can start from a very young age. And we can do it at home when we help our kids just think about things like, well, now, when I said that and you thought I was mean, look at my face. Look at my face. Do I look mad? No. Well, did my voice sound cranky? I'm trying to think of the words my daughter has used, which work well with her son when he was little. Yes, you sounded. They said, well, I'm sorry. Let me say it in a better way. And so then she would say it in a softer way, and he'd say, oh, and then he would get it. So helping him kind of see those things and interpret them a little differently
Tone of
seems
voice
to help you.
is a big thing with trying to understand with what a person's emotional state is. Somebody has a more certain tone of voice, I think they're angry. That's just an instant reaction. So watch the tone of voice. But it can be learned both ways by letting them know that a louder tone of voice doesn't always mean that you're angry, but then also try to actively understand how they can be picking up on your voice as well. So work on it both ways.
So that's really that working on thinking with your eyes, looking at me, and then getting some coaching information back as well. I think the thing that I like so much about social thinking is that it really is teaching life skills from early age on. This leads to more independent life skills. It's the kind of thing that, grows from the roots upward. And then we can work on tweaking the little skills or the specific skills. But we have to make sure we're paying attention to the things that are in the roots in the trunk as well. So. there are no other questions, thank you very much to our panelists for coming, and thank all of you. And if you would like to buy a ticket, they're available at the back table. And we are working toward an evening lunch and learn too. So if you could give us an idea of a good evening time. Except we'll have to change the name. I don't know.
Dinner and learn.
Evening lunch and learn. We want people to know it'll be the same topic. It'll just be at a time that might be convenient, more convenient sometimes. Thank you very much for coming.